The EU has an enormous budget. It plans to spend over 1,000 billion euros for the period of 2021 to 27. But how efficiently is it spent, and is the money really doing what we want it to do? These are the questions that will be discussed in our next session, and I'm happy to be here in the studio with Petra Pinzler. She's an editor with die ZEIT in the political section, where she works mostly on economics and climate change. Hello, Petra.
Hi.
And she will be joined by Klaus-Heiner Lehne from the European Court of Auditors and Professor Alina Mungiu-Pippidi from the Hertie School in Berlin. The session and the floor is yours.
Thank you. And let me warmly welcome you to the session. The two people I will talk to, you will see them pretty soon. I'm proud to have them here. We only have a sharp half hour, so we have to be quick, and we will be quick. I'm pretty sure, Klaus-Heiner Lehne, that we could speak in German as well, but for reasons of politeness, we switched to English so that Alina Mungiu-Pippidi can actually listen to what you're saying. You're the head of the European Court of Auditors, and when I checked on Google European Court of Auditors and checked the Deutsche Bundesrechnungshof, we have much more news about the Deutsche Bundesrechnungshof doing kind of thing that you do as well. So how come? Do you have less work? Do you have a different kind of public? Is there less a problem that you have to look into as the head of the European Court of Auditors? How is your work?
I think that is indeed quite a difficult question, but I hope that I can answer it easily. We are, of course, much smaller than the Bundesrechnungshof. We are as well having a budget, or having to control a budget, that is much smaller than the federal budget of the Federal Republic of Germany. So the overall annual budget, I think, of Germany is around 400 billion each year. And we speak, if we take a look at the regular budget, around 135, 150, something like that per year. So it's less than half of that, what the federal level is spending. And then, of course, we are not only addressing aspects in Germany, we are addressing aspects all over Europe in 27 member states. And from that background, I think it is quite easy to explain that the media impact of our activities is smaller than the media impact of the Bundesrechnungshof. On the other side, I think what we are doing is quite important. We are the smallest institution of the more or less 7 constitutional institutions of the European Union. But of course, we have a very important task. We have to check the finances of the spending of the EU. These are mainly 2 aspects. First is the compliance aspect. This is our annual report, which we have to issue a so-called statement of assurance. We check the regularity of the spending of the European Union. And the other aspect, the other more or less 50% of our work, are the so-called performance reports. We do around 40 per year. And those performance reports, they are mainly dealing with the aspect of efficiency. And then we select different issues each year, as I said, around 40, where we take a more intensive look at, and that maybe certain spendings in agriculture, maybe certain spendings in infrastructure, maybe research, maybe foreign support. That means, for example, development aid or things like that. So different aspects that change, of course, over the different years, which are not always the same. We try to cover as much as possible, but with our limited resources, we can only do 40. The demands coming from Council and Parliament asking us are much higher. So normally we receive from Parliament 150 demands for reports. We are unable to do more than the 40 that we are doing, but I think the 40, they are quite helpful to support the work of the people that at the end have to control the executive, which is Commission, which is Parliament and Council.
Let me remind our listeners, if you want to co-moderate this session, you can send in, as always, questions via slido.com, and I'll be happy to pick them up. Alina Mungiu-Pippidi, before I bring you in, let me just present you to the public. You're a professor at Hertie School of Governance here in Berlin. You worked as a journalist. This is something I learned recently when I checked your CV at Wikipedia. You founded Romania's largest think tank. You created the Coalition for a Clean Parliament in Romania, and this is just to name a few things that you have done. You deal with corruption, and when I spoke with Mr. Lehne about corruption, he said, this is not our issue. So we'll come to corruption in a bit, in a couple of minutes, and talk with you about corruption. But let me get to Mr. Lehne with the second question. Corruption is not your issue. Why not?
I think it's a side effect, because we are doing audits. We are not an institution that is hunting for people that are doing fraud or corruption or anything else which is forbidden and which is criminal. We are doing audits. We check the overall budgets and we take a look via statistical means. So we take out certain examples where we take a look at that, and then sometimes we detect, of course, fraud. And sometimes, of course, we may detect aspects of corruption, but then it is just our job to pass it to the institutions within the European Union, which are Olaf and which are the EPPO, that are then dealing with this, that are prosecuting this and trying to do the necessary investigations, and then to give this to the authorities that do the prosecution. It's not our job.
When we prepared this session and we had a small talk, you said something very interesting. You said it's much less today our job to see whether the money is spent correctly, following every letter of what has been written, but rather if it's spent efficiently. Can you explain what's the difference?
Yeah, I think that's very easy. The question of compliance, it means, is it spent correctly, is mainly an aspect, have they done the right calculations? So is it from the mathematical point of view right? And of course, the other important issue is it legally right? So have they followed the rules in spending the money? But if you check this and if you have a good compliance, that does not mean automatically that the money is spent in an efficient way. So, for example, you could have a certain project on infrastructure, maybe a terminal at an airport or something like that, where the compliance part is absolutely perfect. But at the end, you have a terminal standing there around and nobody is using this. Then the clear answer is, of course, it was a perfect compliance, but it was not efficient to have this kind of construction over there and to have supported it. And more, because of the achievements that over the last 20, 30 years had been achieved in the way how compliance had become much better, we are more and more concentrating on the aspect of efficiency. That's as well expected by our stakeholders. So the stakeholders expect that we do more on this aspect of performance. By the way, this is not only a development on the European Union level, so not only a specific task that is becoming stronger and stronger in the European Court of Auditors, that's a worldwide effect. So if you speak with colleagues from other supreme audit institutions on the national level or in similar institutions like us, you will everywhere hear exactly the same. They are focusing more and more on performance. And compliance is, of course, important, but it's not the dominating aspect anymore.
When I checked your websites, which I hadn't done for quite a while, I have to admit, I found a couple of really interesting reports. One was dealing with the way we spent money on fighting the climate crisis. And you had some of the recommendations that you made were pretty political, like, for example, cut subsidies for airplane, cut subsidies for the famous German diesel. So aren't you entering too much into the political arena there? Or could you argue this is just a way of calling into question whether Europe fights efficiently the climate crisis?
I think this is indeed a real problem, because if you do performance audits, there's always a risk that you will find politicians at the end unhappy, because they simply think it's their job to do that and they should express opinions on this issue and not a supreme audit institution. But on the other side, our argumentation is, first, of course, we have to be careful. We have to try to find a way in between on having clear statements on facts. Always activities that we are doing are based on facts. And on the other side, not to interfere too much into political choices. This is right. But I think our experts, they have learned this over the years, so they know where the limits are. But on the other side, we are not interfering into the decision power of the politicians. We are simply stating facts and doing some kind of research and taking a look at how things are developing and if targets have been achieved. And I think these are simply factual things. And we, of course, make them public and we tell that to the main stakeholders. But then it is still the decision-making power of the politicians to decide if they continue or if they do not continue. I give you a simple example. Morocco. We are giving budget support as kind of development aid to Morocco. And then we did, of course, a performance audit on this issue. And the results were more or less in this performance audit, from our point of view, that the targets that should be achieved, especially in the area of rule of law, development of democracy, and things like that, that they were not reached, that they were not achieved. So, and the matter of consequence, of course, was that this was quite a critical report. The Commission at the end said, we have no alternative. We need to support Morocco because of the special relations that we have with that state, and especially as well because of the simple fact that they play a certain role in refugee policy. So, but this is still a political decision. So if the politicians think that they could still go on like that and that they could ignore that there are overarching political reasons to do something like that, it's up to them. Another issue is, for example, infrastructure. We criticized some years ago intensively the partially EU-financed investments in certain harbor structures in northern Germany because the harbors were simply not needed. And then, of course, the politicians came and said, but it was our decision to do something for the region to have this kind of construction over there. Okay, if they think it has to be done simply because they want to do something for the region, even if nobody's using the harbor, fine, that's a political decision, but it's our duty as an institution that is in charge of doing audit, then simply to tell the public and the stakeholders that there is a problem. There we
Alina, I see you kind of smiling when you listen to Klaus-Heiner, Lehne. Would you say that the line between money misspent for political reasons and corruption is a very thin one? Or can you say clearly, this is corruption and this is something, just as Mr. Lehne said, politicians spend money the way they want, and sometimes it's not the most efficient way?
Well, you know, as social scientists, we do not define corruption as lawyers do. In other words, we have a far more comprehensive definition of corruption, and we consider corruption a large number of activities which are legal, you know, and for instance, and not only that, but we have something which is called institutional corruption. For instance, I consider that systematic deviation from the European principles of equal treatment or non-discrimination and transparency in handing out European money in the form of contracts of public procurement, I consider this institutional corruption. But this can happen very, very well without fraud happening. So in other words, you can have government favoritism so well organized that some companies are permanently favored and other companies are discriminated, and very little fraud results. You know, if you look in total how many Olaf investigations were in Greece over the space of 20 years, you will discover really a handful of investigations. So I think, that this discussion on corruption should rather be turned into a discussion of good governance, which is anyway where corruption meets this performance discussion. Money spent efficiently is generally money spent non-corruptly, because it is really very difficult to have good value for money if somebody has undue profit. We really have a lot of evidence on this. Everything, I can prove that European procurement, which is non-competitive, which is this situation that we call single bidding. In other words, on paper, it is competitive procurement, but in practice, due to the fact that people's expectations are that there is a favorite and the favorite will win the tender due to various reasons, like, term manipulation of terms of reference and whatever. So what I can prove is that this kind of tenders have very bad value for money. So the more competitive procurement is, the better value for money. So in fact, luckily, and when I think you are confronted, which is the case in Europe, with large-scale infringements of good governance frequently, what you have to have are policy targets and some sort of policy how to enforce good governance and performance, and not this kind of post-factum chase one by one after potential culprits, because sometimes not times, more often than not, you will not find the culprits. It will take you years. Trials are expensive. So prevention and organizing of the European spending in a way which is mindful of this, biological law of nature. Individuals tend to profit more than their due in an environment which creates opportunities for undue profit, right? So what we have to manipulate is environment. And I think that there's loads of money that are coming, in Europe these days with the green money and with the recovery money and everything are unfortunately, by the simple fact that they are so many and sometimes very superficially defined, creating a lot of opportunities for corruption.
when you started talking, you mentioned Olaf, and let me just explain to our listeners, they might not know what it is. Olaf is the institution that looks into fraud all over Europe. But let me follow up with a question concerning the state of in which Europe is at the moment, concerning the misspending of money. Is it worse than 10 years ago? Is it better? Is there any way to assess this?
Well, we have some ways of assessing this. I mean, now we have put all the European tenders. We put over 47 million European open tenders in open format with risk indicators on our website platform, opentender.eu. So I think that everybody can look at countries and see if value for money have improved and if competition has improved. The Commission also picked up a couple of our risk indicators. For instance, the single bidding that I mentioned, you can now see it on the Single Market European Commission website. And the fact that it's there, it's very good because it creates some sort of pressure for countries. You know, it's a sort of shaming. If you look and you are shown there that you have the worst procurement in Europe, you would do something. And you see countries like Croatia, which, for instance, improved over the past 3 years. But you also see, you know, I recently looked and calculated these figures in Albania because I had procurement data, full procurement data over 3 years, which is really great. I don't work as an auditor. I work with data, with big data. But in many, many ways, what I do is close to what European Audit Court does. And when you compare Albania, you see that Albania is actually no worse than Hungary is or than Poland is. So, in fact, you can see that there is a great variety across Europe. And now we're speaking only of direct spending of money, you know, but like procurement. But there are ways of, you know, other ways of wasting European money. And of course, the money that we give, we also can prove that projects are the most efficient. I mean, projects reach their targets, whatever their targets was, an airport or something else, in countries where the corruption is lower. So European money reach the targets for which they were created, the more the quality of governance is good in a country. And this has always been like this. There are some countries in the middle, like Italy, where you can see that they are fairly efficient. They manage to reach targets, but in the same time, they have very high government favoritism. And then there are countries low on government favoritism and very good on targets. They know what they want. They use this money well. And then there are countries which are also poorer and with lowest capacity of policy formulation and with really very bad governance. And there is where money misses target a lot.
When you have this list of countries, is it the cliche that we always have, the Nordics are better and in the south it gets worse, or is this just a cliche that I'm having in my mind? So Denmark is very fine because it's very open, Sweden is very fine because it's very open, very transparent?
Well, if you look in a very limited way, just at European money and at public contracting, I think that the cliche comes close. I mean, not so close, because Malta was really a criminal country, you know, until very little time ago. Okay, and there are other countries which are on the border that people would not expect them to be on the border. Or other countries have been through tremendous cleanup, like Spain, which, if you look what happens with EU funds there, it was really a criminal venture 10, 15 years ago, and now it's a lot better than it has been. But, you know, there are other areas. I mean, the kind of cliches no longer, when corruption are concerned, no longer fit Europe, because the structure of opportunities, I think, was seriously modified by the 2008 economic crisis, which simply pushed some companies to the wall. So if you look like a company like Airbus, settled by paying 4 billion and confessing basically in this way to corruption in multiple jurisdictions. And if you look like Swedish companies, semi-public Swedish company Telia paid to settle for bribery in Uzbekistan nearly €1 billion to American authorities under Foreign Corrupt Practice Act, then you actually see that there are no longer good countries and bad countries. And I don't even want to open the discussion about Germany.
Oh, go for it.
Where really Germany has been sliding, south dangerously, and it's and unlike some countries which are aware of their problems, they're very corrupt, but they're aware of their problems. In Germany, there continues to be this feeling that Germany is an exception, that Germany still has the fantastic standards of good governance, which I presume they once had, but which now they no longer have, which shows with Wirecard and the variety of other cases.
Alina, I just get the question whether you please repeat the internet website where people can find this kind of information. Apparently, you're raising a lot of interest. Is it
It's opentender.eu.
Okay.
Opentender.eu. I also recommend to people to look at the other webpage where regulation is, which is Europam, PAM, Public Accountability Mechanism.eu. So you can correlate the one with the other, okay, to see to what extent regulation is what creates good development or not, because it's not so simple. It's more complicated.
Okay, maybe our team will enter them in the chat later on. Let me get back to Mr. Lehne. When Alina Mungiu-Pippidi mentioned that Europe is spending more and more money, this is something you were referring to also when we spoke earlier, that due to the Corona money and to the climate fund, more and more money is spent from the European level downwards to European countries, European cities, European communities, and that you also looking into that and that some of the governments don't really like that. Did I get you right on that point?
Yeah, I think at the end, it doesn't matter if they like it or not, EU spending. And so I think we have the duty and of course we have the right to take a look at that. But you're completely right, there is some kind of resistance. This new way of payment that has more or less just started, that means the so-called Next Generation EU or the Resilience Facility, which are connected to those issues, to the recovery from the Corona crisis and other issues, they follow another system of spending. The traditional MFF in the European Union is very easy. You have a project, you just ask the Commission or someone else who is in charge, could this be financed? And then you are doing the project. You may get some payments in between, and then at the end you get as well something. But the project is checked. So it is depending on the project, on the fulfillment of the conditions of the project, that you get the money. The NGU is different. It's front-loading. So that means that the member states, for their specific programs that they are developing, have to ask the Commission if this is in line with the general preconditions for the RRF NGEU spending. And if this is in line, the Commission says, okay, it's fine. And then they give the money to the member state as a kind of front-loading. Condition for the member state is that he realizes and that he fulfills the so-called milestones and targets that had to be achieved. For example, on digitalization, on environmental protection, on climate protection, on other issues that have been defined as targets in there. So the system is different. It becomes more and more important if the money is spent with a result. That means the performance becomes the important issue. And we, of course, as auditors, think that we have to check that. And sometimes we have a little bit of dispute on this issue with the Commission and sometimes as well with some member state governments on the way how we do that. There is in some parts of the EU the feeling that if this money is given to the member states, it's the sole responsibility of the member state what happens with that. And as well, the control system are only the control systems of the member states, that the EU level has not any longer to interfere into this. This is not our opinion. We think that as well we have the right, because it's more or less money coming from the EU, to take a look at that and to audit it, and we will do so, there is no doubt.
But you haven't started an investigation yet. I mean, if I get it correctly, the EU has money and it just gives to the country, and then the country is fine with it. This is the position of the member states.
This is not of all the member states, but there are some member states that, of course, think that we should not involve ourselves too much in this issue. This is true. Yeah, this is right, because they say they have their own control systems. They function, and there's absolutely no need for additional control by the EU level. By the way, parts of the Commission think quite similar. If you speak with some services within the Commission, you have sometimes the feeling that they as well feel this is a kind of budget support. So we give money to the member state and then it's gone. And only if we hear that there is some trouble, then we may do some investigations and then we will take a look. And they as well trust the national control systems. Of course, some trust in the national control system is of course right. But it's still EU money. So we have to be involved in this process, and we will be involved in this process. By the way, we are already doing some audits. There's one audit already underway dealing with the way how the Commission has checked the national plans. So if they are already fulfilling the conditions as I described in the original regulations. So this is already going on, and we are just in the process of deciding what exactly we do in the compliance audit that we have to do for the year 21. Because in 21, there was already one payment done to Spain. And so this will probably as well play a role in the annual report that we have to deliver for the year 2021.
The problem is probably the more Europe spends money not in the correct way, the more and more people call into question whether it's okay to give Europe that much money.
Yeah, that's exactly the reason why it is so important to have audits and control. Yeah, because this is a precondition, of course, that nothing goes wrong. And overall, if I take a look at the experiences of the last 20 years or something like that, the situation has improved. It has not deteriorated, it has become better. It's still not there where it should be, but it has improved. But if this kind of new financing goes wrong and does not achieve the results that is expected with this, then of course, I'm afraid that then the whole system of giving money to the EU and spending by the EU will be questioned, of course.
Alina, if you had the chance to change one or two things within Europe to make the way we deal with money and we spend money better, what would you do if you were, let's say, the President of the Commission or the German Bundeskanzler, or whatsoever?
Yeah, I always argued that the only way to solve this fundamental problem of money being given from above without any controls, and I'm not optimistic that you can create centralized controls for Europe, which is just too big. The only way to do this is by having a system where you actually involve European citizens. You involve European citizens in the targets of this money, so some form of consultation, what is the money for? And you absolutely create evaluation programs at the end where you involve the citizens. You know, my argument has always been that if you ask the Sicilian villagers in a 300 inhabitants place if they really needed a pool when they were on the seaside anyway, of an Olympic size, you would have found out very fast that this was not what they needed and the money went elsewhere. But in the whole evaluation system, there was never a moment where you did a survey of consumers. And today we live in digital times. It is really very, very easy to actually survey people and have some kind of evaluation and consultation system to see if people could veto programs and people could approve programs, and they could tell you really if the money were spent correctly. And I think this would also increase the popularity of Europe, all right? Because people would feel that this is their money. Like this, they feel it's money for elites, and they feel that it only reinforces whatever previous patterns a country had. If country had favoritism and local barons, as Mr. Varoufakis said, then the money would go and reinforce the barons. And, there's evidence that this is what happens. If a country is clean, then, the money would be well spent, and nobody really cares about this money of Europe anyway, except in poor countries.
And what's your suggestion, Mr. Lehne? Would you go for this one, or you have another one?
Yeah, I think this is at least partially functioning, because the country that I know best and the country in which I actually live, exactly that is happening. I think for every kind of public project, there is a citizen participation. The only problem that I always see is that many citizens simply do not use the opportunities for this kind of participation. So probably I do not know what exactly could be done to improve this. And of course, it has to be as well guaranteed that those people that take the decisions later take note of that, what is said by those citizens. Yeah. So this, I think, is crucial. On the other issue, what I believe is absolutely necessary, and that's what we are already doing. There must be a strong cooperation between the centralized audit bodies, between the national ones, the regional ones, and of course, if necessary, even the local ones. And I think we are developing this, and we are all of the time improving on this issue, especially these new aspects of NGU, RRF. They play an important role in the communication that we have with the national audit offices. So it will be on the prime agenda of the conference that we will have this year, because of course we cannot do everything. We depend as well that we have functioning systems on national and regional level.
I knew that half an hour would be too short, and I would love to continue the debate with you about how we could better have the people participate in European decisions. Unfortunately, our time is over. So the only thing I can do now is to say thank you to the listeners, thank you to both of you, and I'm pretty sure we will continue this debate.